Okay, so now we've got all of our components cleaned and ready for installation. The next step is we're going to lube the bearings really well within the engine itself. Again, we're using our Royal Purple Max Tuff assembly lube. This is a great product that's made for just this sort of application. So as you can see, this is a very thin lube. It comes out very thin, which is going to be fine for this application. Again, like I said earlier, if we were using a flat tappet for the lobes of the camshaft itself, we'd be using a thicker lubrication, since you'd have a lot of metal to metal friction between the lifters and the cam itself. But since this is a roller lifter setup, we're not going to have nearly as much friction, so it's not as necessary to have that thick lube on the lobes. But as you can see, I'm just going around methodically and making sure I get lots of lube on the bearing sets, making sure that we don't have any metal to metal contact when we get ready to put the cam in. Any engine builder will tell you that at this part of the build, lube is your friend. You want to use as much as you can without being sloppy with it, obviously, but don't be concerned that you're having some lube run down onto the rest of the engine. Just make sure that the areas you're trying to get contact lubrication on has plenty to work with. Okay, before we start lubing the cam up, there's a couple things I want to go over. First, they do make a tool that actually screws into the front end of the camshaft to give you a handle to work with as you're installing this. Because one of the key things you're going to have to be careful of, and go slow and use lots of lube again, is you don't want to ding any of these lobes or any of the bearing areas. So if you're moving it in and you're trying to hold just this nub when you're starting to get the rest of the camshaft in, it's going to be very awkward, and there's a good chance of scuffing the bearings or nicking one of these lubes. So it's always good to have some sort of area that you can actually handle. Since we don't have that tool, we actually have a couple of 5/16 by 20 bolts that we're going to actually use to do the exact same thing, to give us a little more handle surface to work with as we're installing this cam. So I'm going to install those real quick, and then we'll show you how to start lubing up the camshaft. Okay, so we've got the cam bearings and the block lubed up. Now we're going to start lubing up the camshaft itself and installing it. We're going to start at the rear, obviously. We have our distributor drive gear. That's how we can tell that this is the back of the camshaft. You can also see Comp Cams actually grinds in the specs and the part number for the camshaft itself on the back end of the camshaft. So if anybody ever pulled it out, they'd have that information on the cam itself. So the first thing I'm going to do on this first journal is to go ahead and get it started by lubing it up, and then we'll go over to the block and we'll start this actual installation. And as I stated earlier, you're going to want to go slow and take your time and make sure you use plenty of lube. So we're going to get the first journal in, hold the other end to support it, and we're going to put a little lube on everything here, and then we'll rub it in to the next journal. Okay, so as we've got everything lubed up and are ready to go to the next one, keep in mind that these journals are all supporting this, so if you just start pushing the camshaft in, when that journal goes through, this is all going to drop and land on that bearing. So you're going to want to make sure that you support it as you push it through, so that when it comes off that bearing journal, you still have good support for the system, so it doesn't bang around on the bearing itself until you get to that next journal. And then once we have it seated on the next bearing set, we'll let it sit there, and we'll start the whole process over again. So now we're going to go to the next one. Again, support everything as you put it in, because it is going to fall out of those bearing journals, and you don't want it banging around in there. Okay. So now we have 3 in, 2 more to go. So now that we've gotten to this process, now we're going to have more weight in the engine than out of the engine. Since this is an open block, a clean install, I'm going to be able to reach down and grab some of this and support it as it goes through. If this was a built engine that you're just changing the cam on, this is when it becomes very important to have some leverage on this end of the camshaft itself. But like I said, since we have an open block, I'm actually able to reach in here and help myself a little bit as I move it on in by catching the other end of it. Okay, so I've got obviously a lot of lube on my gloves. I'm going to actually go ahead and swap swap out my gloves so that I have good handles to use to get the rest of the way in, because this is really the tricky part of the actual camshaft install, so that I don't bang anything up. I'm going to have good handles here. So let me change out my greasy gloves and I'll be right back. So this is the part where I just need to take my time, not get in a rush, try and support the cam as much as I can. And now we have a camshaft in our block. First part is in. We'll go ahead and take these off. Be right back. Talk about the next project. All right, so thanks for coming to the episode. As you can see, we've got our cam in. We've checked it to make sure it's moving freely. We've got a good install there. Stay tuned for our next episode. We're actually going to talk about our clearances, our rod clearances and our main bearing clearances, because those are key before we go any further in our install. So stay tuned for that episode, and we'll see you then. So thanks for watching In the Garage with PerformanceParts.com. Go to PerformanceParts.com for all of your performance needs, and call our number, our 800 number off of our website, to get professional advice about this kind of build or whatever kind of build you're trying to do for your performance vehicle. We'll see you in the next episode.